We shall move to questions without notice, and I give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, over the last 2 years, this government will bring in people. My questions to the Prime Minister. Mr Speaker, over the last 2 years, the Albanese government has brought in almost 1 million people into our country. Only 265,000 homes have been built. In fact, building activity is at an 11-year low. We have people who are living in cars and tents at a record level, and yet nothing in this budget provides support to those people. At the same time, the Prime Minister is giving billions of dollars to billionaires. Prime Minister, why does this government have the wrong priorities, and why is this Prime Minister so weak that he can't provide support to Australians in need?
Order. Order. Members on my right, the Minister for Home Affairs will cease interjecting. So the Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Well, the only thing that is broader than our support for cost of living relief is that question from the Leader of the Opposition, Mr Speaker, because it was all over the shop. The first issue of migration, the population statement of 2023 says this. For 2030-31, the expected population is 600,000 people below what was projected prior to the onset of the pandemic in 2019-2020. And guess who championed the higher migration intake? See if you can guess who said this. We do need an increase in the migration numbers. It's clear the number needs to be higher. That's the Leader of the Opposition. And indeed, in his first budget reply, he said, "I brought in record numbers of people from India, China and many other countries." They were out there all promoting not just him, but the you know it's coming, don't you? You know it's coming. Help us spread the word about studying here to help us overtake the UK as the world's second most popular study destination. That was the member for Wannon. The deputy leader. We know that urgently business needs a workforce, and much of that workforce needs to come from overseas. And we know that they left an absolute mess when it came to migration, because Dr. Martin Parkinson, the person appointed by the coalition to be head of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet.
Order. The Prime Minister will pause. The member for Deakin will cease having a conversation. Interjections are okay, but order. Order. Having a conversation and interjecting, both. Just so I'm clear. The Prime Minister in continuation.
Dr. Parkinson's, in his report, said this is a 10-year rebuild. This is not something you do quickly because it is so badly broken. It was a deliberate decision to neglect the system. And the Leader of the National Party, of course, also had to say this, because I don't want to leave the Nats out. We've got to acknowledge some of the challenges that we left behind. You've got to put your hand up. You've got to be honest with people. That is what he had to say about the migration mess that was left behind. Mr Speaker,
order.
They then go on.
Order. The Leader of the Nationals will cease interjecting.
To speak about the centrepiece of our budget last night that they just referred to is, of course, our tax cuts for every taxpayer. A tax cut for every taxpayer.
Order. The Prime Minister's time has concluded. Prime Minister's time has concluded. Order. The House comes to order. The Leader of the Opposition will order. The House is going to come to order because I want to hear from the next member and her question. Order. Now that the House has come to order, we'll hear from the member for Gilmore.
My question is to the Treasurer. How does the Albanese Labor government's responsible budget help ease cost of living pressures, and what approaches were rejected?
The call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the wonderful member for Gilmore for her question and for all of her work in our team and on behalf of her community. We know on this side of the House, Mr Speaker, that a lot of Australians are under pressure. And because of the budget last night, more help is on the way. This is a responsible budget which is all about easing cost of living pressures and fighting inflation and investing in the future of our people and their economy, Mr Speaker. The cost of living relief in the budget is both substantial and responsible. There is a tax cut for every Australian taxpayer in the budget. There is energy bill relief for every Australian household in the budget. There is a second round of Commonwealth rent assistance in the budget, Mr Speaker, as well, because we know that renters are under pressure. And there are billions of dollars set aside in the budget to make medicines cheaper for our people and particularly for our concession card holders, Mr Speaker. And there are other measures in the budget as well. $7.8 billion in cost of living relief in addition to a tax cut for every Australian taxpayer, Mr Speaker. Now, as I said, that cost of living relief is substantial, but it's also responsible. One of the defining features of this Albanese Labor government and the budget we handed down from this dispatch box last night is responsible economic management, which has helped us to clean up the mess that those opposite left behind in the budget. That's how we are delivering a second surplus, which would be the first back-to-back surpluses in almost 2 decades, Mr Speaker. That's how we're finding savings. That's how we're paying down debt. That's how we're avoiding interest costs on the debt that we inherited, the Liberal debt that we inherited from those opposite, Mr Speaker. And we're getting the budget in much better nick, not instead of helping people doing it tough, but as well as helping people doing it tough, Mr Speaker. That's why what we've been able to do last night, getting the budget in better nick, providing cost of living relief for people at the same time as we invest in the future. This is a key reason why we have turned the inflation with a 6 in front of it over to those opposite into inflation with a 3 in front of it. But it's not mission accomplished, Mr Speaker, because we know that people are still under pressure, and that's why people under pressure were the defining influence on the budget that we handed down last night, Mr Speaker. Inflation is still the #1 near-term concern that we have in the economy, and that's why the budget was so responsible. That's why the budget was so attentive to cost of living pressures that people are under, and we found a way to provide that cost of living relief at the same time as we serve our intergenerational responsibilities to build the next generation of prosperity.
The call to the honourable member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. After 3 Labor budgets, this government has added $315 billion of spending, throwing more fuel on the inflationary fire. Rating agency Standard & Poor's has confirmed that as a result of this budget, there is almost no chance of an interest rate cut for struggling families this year. Why are Australians paying the price for this Prime Minister's weak economic leadership?
Call to the Treasurer.
Well, Mr Speaker, he's got a lot of nerve asking about responsible economic management after the mess that they left us to clean up in the budget. We won't be lectured about debt or spending or responsible economic management from the party that left us more than $1 trillion in Liberal Party debt that we have spent our 2 years in office trying to clean up, Mr Speaker. They would not know the first thing about responsible economic management. The least familiar words in the budget last night to those opposite were the word surplus. They had 9 cracks at it, Mr Speaker. They promised a surplus in their first year and every year thereafter, and they came up with donuts, Mr Speaker, none from 9. We've been here for 2 years and we're delivering 2 surpluses at the same time as we provide cost of living relief for people and invest in the future of our economy, Mr Speaker. If they had their way, inflation would be higher, debt and deficits would be bigger, wages growth would be lower, and tax cuts for Middle Australia would be smaller, Mr Speaker. And the reason why I'm so grateful that the Prime Minister has given me the opportunity to answer the member for Hume's question is because it allows me to point out to those opposite that what matters here is real spending growth in the economy. And real spending growth under this side of the House has been 1.4%. You know what it was under those opposite? 4.1%. 4.1%. The hypocrisy of asking us about spending in the budget when they spent in real spending growth was a multiple of the real spending growth that we have seen in our budgets so far, Mr Speaker. We have been cleaning up the mess that they left us of the budget at the same time as we've been providing cost of living relief for people. So I hope, Mr Speaker, that the member for Hume asks many more questions today, because whenever they ask these questions, Mr Speaker, it gives us an opportunity to point for the shameful mess that they left behind in the budget and the diligent and considered and methodical way that we have been cleaning that mess up, and not instead of helping people, not instead of investing in the future, but as well as doing those things, Mr Speaker. And I say about those two surpluses, Mr Speaker, in the budget, if that was easy, even the member for Hume could do it. But they were unable to do it in their 9 years in office. When the member for Hume was the most embarrassing part of a bad government, they were unable to get anywhere near the kinds of outcomes that we are seeing in the budget as the consequence of our diligence and the responsible way that we have come at this difficult task.
There's far too much noise on both sides of the chamber. If that continues, people will be warned and there will be consequences. Give the call to the member for Cunningham.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government's budget delivering for all Australians, not just some?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Cunningham for her question and for her diligence. She knows that the Illawarra, for example, is a great manufacturing centre in Australia. And what we want is for Australians to make more things here. And we know that that has happened in the great regions of the Illawarra, the Hunter Valley, Geelong, the Latrobe Valley, in Western Australia, right around the country. And so whilst we've had our eye on the immediate need to address cost of living pressures which families are under, we've always had our eye on the future. How do we build a secure future for our nation? How do we make more things here? How do we ensure that there are good, secure, high-wage jobs going forward as well? But at the centre of this budget is support for Australians, all Australians. A tax cut for every Australian taxpayer, not just some. Energy bill relief for every Australian household, not just some. Stronger Medicare for every single community, including the 29 additional urgent care clinics added to our 58 that have seen over 400,000 Australians, stopping them from clogging up the emergency departments of our public hospital. And, of course, more homes in every part of the country. Now $32 billion to make a difference for housing supply. But in addition to that, we've made sure that it's a responsible budget, that we've seen something that is foreign to those opposite, which is the creation of not one but two budget surpluses. Last year we turned a $78 billion deficit that we inherited into a $22 billion surplus, and this year we are projecting a $9.3 billion surplus, making sure that we have those responsible measures in place. Our cost of living policies are designed as well to take pressure off inflation by 0.75 percentage point in the current financial year and 0.5 percentage point in next financial year, making sure, which is why we've designed things like the tax cuts, the energy price relief plan, fee-free TAFE, cheaper childcare, all of these measures designed in a calibrated way to make a positive impact on the economy at the same time as they're having a positive impact on household budgets.
Before I call the honourable member for Kooyong, I'm pleased to advise that in the gallery today, and the member for Lingiari has advised me that the Mayor of Alice Springs Town Council, Councillor Matt Patterson, is here. A warm welcome to question time. Call to the honourable member for Kooyong.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is for the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, I understand that last night you attended a $5,000 per head post-budget dinner, which was hosted by the Federal Labor Business Forum. For the benefit of the House, were any fossil fuel industry lobbyists or other fossil fuel industry representatives in attendance?
Just before the Prime Minister answers that question, I do have some difficulty with the phrasing of that question in result that it does potentially relate to party affairs that the Prime Minister can't be asked about. So I'm just going to ask the member for Kooyong to rephrase her question to ensure that it is within standing orders.
Thank you, Speaker. Okay. My question is for the Prime Minister. I understand that you attended a $5,000 a head post-budget dinner last night. Can you tell the House whether any fossil fuel industry lobbyists or other fossil fuel industry representatives were in attendance?
That question is barely within the standing orders. I'll allow the Prime Minister to answer the question, but he'll obviously be able to answer only parts of the question that are relevant to the standing orders.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I've stood and had the great honour of being the Australian Labor Party candidate in 10 elections. During those 10 elections as a candidate for Grainler, I have spent less money on those 10 campaigns than the member for Kooyong did in her one.
Order. Give a call. Give it. Order. No. Order. The member for Hasluck will resume her seat. Order. When the House comes to order, the member for Kooyong, just as any other member, is entitled to raise a point of order. The Prime Minister has concluded his answer, so it obviously can't be on the point of order on relevance, but I'll hear from the member for Kooyong.
Well, my issue, Mr Speaker, is that the Prime Minister has not in any way addressed the substance of my question.
Resume your seat. Order. Order. There was no point. Order. There was no point of order, and it's getting close to abuse of the standing orders, of abusing standing orders in that way. Order. The Leader of the Opposition will cease objecting, because I want to hear from the member for Hasluck.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How does the budget help make a future in Australia by investing in the jobs, industries and opportunities of tomorrow? And what hurdles were overcome?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you to the member for Hasluck for her question and for the way that she represents a great community from out west here in the People's House. Mr Speaker, as we said a moment ago, the primary purpose in the near term in this budget is to help people who are doing it tough and to get the budget in much better nick as well. But one of the really important things about last night's budget is it doesn't neglect our responsibilities to the future. And the budget was all about a vision for making the most of this remarkable opportunity that we have as a country in our industry, in our energy, in our resources, in our skills base, and as an attractive place for investment. The world is changing, Mr Speaker, and the pace of that change is accelerating, and we need to change with it if our people are to be the primary beneficiaries, not victims, of all of that churn and change. And the global transition, the transformation to net zero, is the biggest change in the global economy since the Industrial Revolution. And our $22.7 billion Future Made in Australia package is all about maximising the opportunities that will bring for every single part of the country, whether it's out west in the honourable member's community, or indeed right around Australia, Mr Speaker. We want to make ourselves an indispensable part of the global net zero economy, and the Future Made in Australia investments in the budget last night will help us do it. It will help us maximise the opportunities and secure Australia's place in the world, with an overwhelming focus not on replacing private investment in our economy but facilitating more private investment. Our plan for a future made in Australia is all about attracting that investment. It's all about making Australia a renewable energy superpower. It's about value adding to our resources and strengthening our economic security. It's about improving our innovation and our science and our digital capabilities. And it's about investing in our people and places. This is how we modernise our economy and maximise the opportunities of the future, and not for its own sake, but so that we can deliver a new generation of prosperity for more of our people, a future defined by good, secure, well-paid jobs, not just in some parts of our country, but right around our country, in our suburbs and regions, Mr Speaker. And that's why a future made in Australia is a big priority of this government, not at the expense of our efforts to ease cost of living or to get the budget in better nick, but in addition to that. And that's because we understand on this side of the House that we have generational responsibilities to our people to create a new generation of prosperity which is just as good as the past one, but which recognises the way that the world is changing and we need to change with it.
The call to the honourable member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Under Labor's budgets to date, the typical Australian household with a mortgage is more than $35,000 worse off.
Shame.
Why is the Prime Minister spending $13.7 billion on tax credits for billionaires at a time when ordinary Australian battlers are struggling to make ends meet?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Mr Speaker,
the member for Groom.
Mr Speaker, spare us the questions about billionaires when those opposite called for an election because we wanted to give Gina Rinehart a $4,500 tax cut instead of a $9,000 tax cut, and the Leader of the Opposition was so furious on behalf of his mate that he called for an election over the changes that we made to the tax cuts in January of this year, Mr Speaker. I mean, spare us the faux outrage. Spare us the faux class warfare over there, Mr Speaker. They've had a lot to say about class warfare in the past. And this just goes to the shambolic response that we have seen to the budget last night, Mr Speaker. They're casting around for all kinds of excuses to oppose energy bill relief like they voted against it last time, Mr Speaker. They're looking around for all kinds of excuses to prevent the renewable energy superpower ambitions of this country being realised in the years and the decades ahead, Mr Speaker. Now, this is now two questions that the member for Hume has asked the Prime Minister, and it's hard to work out, Mr Speaker, which one was worse. I mean, the first one, which quoted hundreds of billions of dollars in spending, inadvertently contained that spending contains the indexation of the age pension, for example. So the member for Hume thinks the indexation of the age pension is overspending. And now, Mr Speaker, in this question, he is all of a sudden, in his question, Mr Speaker.
Pause. I want to hear from the member for Hume on a point of order.
Relevance, Mr Speaker. The question was about billions for billionaires. Will you answer the question?
The order. I want to make sure. The member for Lingiari is warned. It's not the time to interject when I'm dealing with a point of order. That continues. People won't get warned. The question contained relief for billionaires when average Australians are worse off. That was the question. I'm just going to make sure if the Treasurer is comparing and contrasting spending, spending for billionaires when average for. So I'm just going to make sure he's relevant and make sure he's doing the compare and contrast to that part of the question and not straying into other matters.
Well, first of all, I remind the House again that those opposite called for an election over the changes to the tax cut, which provided a tax cut for every taxpayer. Secondly, I haven't been here that long, Mr Speaker. I've been here long enough to remember when they used to believe in tax breaks to incentivise business investment, but they seem to have turned their back on that, and again evidence of the shambolic approach that they've taken. Thirdly, if they want to talk about Battler's, Mr Speaker, it's a very good day for them to ask that question. I want to tell you why. A couple of hours ago, we got new data on the wage price index, didn't we? And we got new data on the wage price index which showed that real wages in annual terms are growing by 0.5%, and we complain that. And
Order.
we complain.
Hume has asked his question. Order. Members on my left will cease. The member for Deakin will cease objecting.
Yeah, it's not funny. He's funny, and the reason he's funny. The reason he's funny, Mr Speaker, is because when we came to office, real wages were falling by 3.4%. They are now growing again for the first time in years, and that's because this Prime Minister and this government want people to earn more and keep more of what they earn, and those opposite want people to work longer for less.
Call to the member for Swan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industry. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering on a future made in Australia and rebuilding Australian manufacturing? Why is this support so desperately needed, and what is standing in the way of this support being delivered?
Excellent. Keep the call. Order. The member for Barker knows the rules about particularly interjecting. More than anyone. The Minister for Industry and Science has the call.
Thank you, Speaker, and thanks to the member for Swan for that question. From someone who gets that strong modern economies need strong modern manufacturing capability, because it makes our economy more resilient, creates secure, well-paid blue-collar jobs in our regions to our outer suburbs. And it's why manufacturing sits at the heart of our Future Made in Australia plans released last night. Our $23 billion Future Made in Australia package is about mobilising Australian industry, Australian manufacturing, to make the things that will help us to get to net zero. Investments to boost the refining of our critical minerals, minerals that then go into making batteries, and under our plan, more batteries will be made right here via the Battery Breakthrough Initiative. Investing in green hydrogen will help fuel a green metals future. Our Future Made in Australia Innovation Fund will advance next-generation Aussie manufacturing know-how. Our plan guarantees a strong, secure future for working families in our industrial heartlands. In Illawarra, for example, working to manufacture industrial-scale hydrogen electrolysers at Hysata, or Gladstone, where we backed electrolyser manufacturing at FFI, in south-west WA, where we're investing in new battery and minerals processing know-how. So blue-collar workers in those regions, they can see our plans for the future. But when they look to those opposite, no plan, no future. In fact, everything that the Coalition believes about Australian manufacturing can be written on a white flag. They always give up on Australian manufacturing. They drove out Aussie car manufacturers nearly 10 years ago, and even today, Mr Speaker, the manager of opposition business declares that was absolutely the right decision. The opposition deputy leader calls Australian manufacturing a graveyard. Ironically, she's the Shadow Minister for Industry. The Shadow Treasurer, because we should never forget him, he described the very idea of backing manufacturing and manufacturing workers as bizarre. That from the Shadow Treasurer. So tomorrow, the Leader of the Opposition, he's got a chance to lay out a plan to back Australian manufacturing and blue-collar workers. Is he going to do something to grow manufacturing, or will he do what Liberals normally do, surrender and give up on Australian manufacturing? Will he come up with another shoddy coalition grants program that manufactures colour-coded spreadsheets that slosh around cash in marginal seats? Because his political interests are always prioritised above the national interest. He needs to come up with a plan for manufacturing tomorrow, and we will be waiting to see what he says.
Concluded. Give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
My question is to the Prime Minister and concerns the energy rebate announced in the budget. If we take a typical Australian, let's call him Andrew, who recently had to relocate from Bellevue Hill to Parramatta for work reasons and happens to own 5 houses, including a newly acquired $12 million beach house at Palm Beach, will he be eligible to receive the rebate on all 5 houses?
Order. Order. The member for Barker is now warned. Order. Members on my right will cease interjecting immediately. The House will come to order. There's far too much noise. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Well, I'm asked about our energy policy, and this is
the Leader of the Opposition.
He's full of hubris and anger today. A very bad combination, Mr Speaker. A very bad combination. Because when we had the previous energy price relief plan, they opposed it. They voted against it when it went just to people who were on payments, when it went to low-income earners. Now that we have an energy price relief plan that goes to all Australians, they're going to vote against that as well. They're now against that. Last night, I watched late the Shadow Treasurer on. It was on. Well, I wanted to see the Treasurer on 7:30, and he was on afterwards. They gave him 30 seconds afterwards on the 7:30 report, and there he made it very clear that he was opposed to the Future Made in Australia plan, opposed to manufacturing, but he did actually say, I thought, that he supported some of the measures of support. It was in there. But now today they are finding a way to crab walk away from giving any support to Australians. Just like when we announced our tax cuts for every Australian, first of all, they said they hadn't seen it but they were against it. Then they said they'd roll it back. Then they said we should go to an election on it, and then they voted for it. But they're still bagging it.
Order. Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? Give the court order. 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 When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the honourable member for Aston.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How is the Albanese Labor government acting to help families and businesses with the cost of energy bills, and how does this compare to alternative energy policies?
Order. Order. The member for Deakin will leave the chamber under 94A. We've been constantly interjecting. I can't even hear the question, and before she's concluded her question, people are just interjecting continuously. So we're going to revert back to the way question time has been operating. When a member is asking a question, they'll be heard in silence, on both sides and across the crossbench. Everyone's earned the right to be here and everyone's earned the right to ask a question. What happens after that is depending on the remarks of the chamber, but not during the question. So the member for Aston will begin her question again.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How is the Albanese Labor government acting to help families and businesses with the cost of energy bills, and how does this compare to alternative energy policies?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I appreciate the question from the terrific member for Aston, Mr Speaker. And from the 1st of July, every taxpayer in Australia will receive a tax cut, and from the 1st of July, everybody who has an energy bill will receive an energy bill rebate under the Albanese government, Mr Speaker. And in Victoria, that means 2.7 million households and 230,000 small businesses, which is good news for those businesses, Mr Speaker. And it comes after the recent Victorian default offer default offer, which was encouraging because it showed a 6% reduction in energy prices. We know there's a lot more to do, but when you put the energy price reduction and the tax cuts and those encouraging default offers, then we are seeing real relief, Mr Speaker, for Australians who we recognise have been doing it very tough. And also last night we had other reforms in the budget which facilitate work with the states to ensure that people who are entitled to a discount get it automatically, and also that people who want to change their provider can do so easily with one-click switching of energy bills. Now, the honourable member asked me what approaches we have rejected and how they compare. Now, there have been other approaches, Mr Speaker, in the past. This is a month of anniversaries. May, it's a month of anniversaries, political anniversaries, 2 years since the election of the Albanese government. It's also 2 years since the member for Hume changed the law to hide a 20% price rise for the Australian people, Mr Speaker. He changed the law. 2 years ago today, prices were going up 20%. We just didn't know about it. We didn't know about it. We were meant to know on the 1st of May. The member for Hume changed the law, wrote a regulation, changed the law, so we didn't find out until the 25th of May, 2 years ago this month. We take a different approach. We take an approach of providing relief to Australians, not hiding the truth from Australians, not hiding from them big energy price rises, but rather dealing with what is before us and dealing with the relief we can provide. Now, there have been other approaches as well. I was perhaps, I have to say, a little unfair to the Leader of the Opposition yesterday. I said he'd never released an energy policy, and he hasn't this term, but he did when he was running against the member for Wentworth for Prime Minister. That's right. He announced that he would take the GST off all energy bills if he was Prime Minister at the cost of $32 billion, which would apply to billionaires, Mr Speaker, if he'd done that. If he took the GST off energy prices, we take a better approach. We take an approach of working with the states to provide real relief to people doing it tough. He has a chance tomorrow night to announce more policies. He can announce his nuclear policy with the sites and the costings. He can announce how he will help Australians doing it tough. He can announce what his real plan for Australians are when it comes to energy relief, because 2 years into this term he has announced not a single policy. Not a single energy policy, nothing about relief for families 2 years in. The Leader of the Opposition has a chance tomorrow night to outline his alternative vision with real costed policies.
Order.
We can't wait
the Minister's
to see.
time has concluded. Give the call to the honourable member for Nichols.
My question is to the Minister for Local Government and Regional Development. After 2 years and 3 budgets, the minister is yet to announce a single regional grant funded by Labor's Centrepiece Regional Development Program. The government's own timeline for the Growing Regions program from the October 22 budget states that successful grant recipients must start their projects no later than today, the 15th of May. But 18 months on, the minister hasn't even announced a single successful recipient. Why has Labor abandoned regional Australia?
Give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government. Order. The minister has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Again, can I thank very much the member for Nichols for that question. In this budget, we are delivering billions of dollars in new infrastructure investment right the way across this country, including in our regions. In your home state of Victoria, we're putting $150 million into the Maroona to Portland rail line, something that those opposite have been talking about for ages. I know the member for Wannon is going to say thank you very much for that investment, because that is a project that is incredibly important to regional Australia. We are also delivering over $1 billion in our election commitments, construction underway in projects across the country in our regions. Now, I have finalised the assessments for the Growing Regions program and the Regional Partnerships program, and I look forward to making announcements shortly.
Order. The House comes to order. Order. We hear from the member for Fremantle.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Social Services. How will social services measures in the government's 2024-25 budget help ease the cost of living pressures for Australians right around the country?
Call to the Minister for Social Services.
Well, thank you, Speaker. I'd like to thank the member for Fremantle for that question and for his continued advocacy on behalf of families and seniors in his electorate. Now, the Albanese government is committed to delivering responsible cost of living relief for Australians, including targeted support for pensioners and income support recipients. In this budget, we've taken action to provide more cost of living assistance and strengthen our social security safety net. To support renters that rely on Commonwealth rent assistance, we are increasing the maximum rates by a further 10%. This will benefit close to 1 million households. Now, this increase is on top of the increase that we delivered in our last budget, and it is the first back-to-back increase to Commonwealth rent assistance in more than 30 years. It means, combined with indexation, we will have increased the maximum rates of rent assistance by more than 40% since being elected. Now, we are also extending the eligibility for the higher rate of job seeker to people who have been assessed as only being able to work up to 14 hours a week, because we know these people have additional barriers to working. And it builds on our changes in the last budget to extend the eligibility for the higher rate of job seeker for people aged over 55. And of course, our government last night committed to continuing to freeze the social security deeming rates for a further 12 months. Now, this keeps the upper deeming rate well below the cash rate, so that part pensioners, along with other income support recipients, will keep more of what they earn. Now, these might be the billionaires that those opposite are referring to. Well, these part pensioners deserve some extra cost of living support, and that is what we are doing. Now, of course, it depends on individual circumstances. But, for example, a pensioner with deemed assets of $250,000 could benefit by more than $2,300 over the course of the coming year. Now, of course, this has been backed here. National Seniors Australia said that our budget delivers a trifecta for older Australians, referring to our cost of living support. Now, of course, in addition to the steps we're taking in my portfolio, the government is delivering further cost of living relief, including through energy rebates for households, delivering cheaper medicines, and of course, on the 1st of July, all Australian taxpayers are receiving a tax cut, helping people keep more of what they earn. Now, unlike those opposite who are full of negativity and have zero plan, Labor will always do what it can do to provide people with more support, ease cost of living pressures and, of course, put downward pressure on inflation.
The call to the member for Goldstein.
Treasurer, since the budget, all I've heard from domestic violence services is outrage. Women can't access help, yet the government chose not to allocate new funding to services like Safe Steps that see more than 200 women put in motels across Victoria every night. Lack of frontline services has led to several suicides this year. Today, I'm launching a petition seeking both government and opposition support to properly fund programs to end violence against women. Treasurer, how many signatures do I need for government to fund these programs?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you to the member for Goldstein, not just for her question, but for her genuine interest and passion and compassion for women who are experiencing or at risk of experiencing domestic and family violence. I think we all understand in this House that violence against women is a national shame and it requires national action and leadership, and we are prepared to provide that leadership. In the budget last night, we invested almost $3.5 billion in addressing violence against women since coming to office, including that $925 million that the PM and some of the colleagues announced for the Permanent Leaving Violence program. I do want to say, and I do want to acknowledge, that even with that substantial investment, we all have much more work to do. We all have much more work that we need to do together because women still aren't safe in our communities, and we acknowledge that. I think the Prime Minister and others have acknowledged that on multiple occasions as well. It's also why we have directed $1 billion of funding for the National Housing Infrastructure Facility towards crisis and transitional accommodation for women and children fleeing violence. and that will add to the $9.3 billion national agreement on social housing and homelessness. We've also got in the Attorney-General's portfolio $44 million to keep the doors open at critical legal assistance centres as well, including women's legal centres, while we negotiate the next National Legal Assistance Partnership. In the Minister for Education's portfolio, almost $20 million to help eradicate gender-based violence from our universities, and some other investments as well in his portfolio. We know that we need to do more. We know that we need to work closely with the states and territories as well, and that's why the National Cabinet on the 1st of May was important. There was broad agreement that we need to do things better. We need to strengthen our systemic responses, particularly with a focus on high-risk perpetrators and serial offenders, and particularly to prevent homicides. And this will require work across all governments and all portfolios and jurisdictions, and there is more work to be done as part of that process. I do acknowledge that the member for Goldstein is asking about another element of really important work that our community service providers do in our local communities. I want to take the opportunity, as I'm sure the member for Goldstein would like to thank and acknowledge the people who do this. Must be incredibly harrowing work. I see it in my own community. No doubt the member sees it in her community as well. We are always prepared to consider what more can be responsibly done as we work together to tackle this national shame of gender-based violence.
Call to the member for Lyons.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health and Aged Care. How does this budget continue to deliver cheaper medicines for all Australians after a decade of cuts and neglect?
Can we call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care?
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for Lyons, because I know that 2 years ago he promised his community in Tasmania that we would make medicines cheaper, and we have been busy delivering on that promise that the member for Lyons made, Mr Speaker. Just in July 2022, within a couple of months of being elected, we slashed the maximum amount that pensioners and concession card holders would pay for their medicines in a given year by 25%, by a full quarter. And a few months after that, we cut the price of around 2,000 brands of medicine. And a few months after that, on the 1st of January last year, we delivered the biggest cut to the price of medicines in the 75-year history of the PBS. And that measure alone will save general patients around $250 million in medicine payments every single year, Mr Speaker. And a bit after that, we allowed doctors to prescribe around 184 different common medicines for ongoing chronic conditions for 60 days' supply rather than just 30, saving patients time and money and freeing up some desperately needed GP consults. But last night, Mr Speaker, not to be outdone, the Treasurer delivered $4.3 billion in new initiatives to make medicines cheaper. And this includes new and amended listings on the PBS that give Australian patients access to the best treatments available in the world at affordable PBS prices, Mr Speaker, like Verzenio, listed just this month. And this is the first new treatment for common forms of early breast cancer listed on the PBS in 15 years. And even when successfully treated at first, 1 in 3 of these women, 1 in 3 of these patients will see that cancer come back, often in far more deadly forms. But Verzenio dramatically reduces the risk of that cancer returning. And it's now available, we think, to around 2,400 patients every single year at no more than $31 a script instead of the going price of $97,000 per patient per course of treatment. And speaking of co-payments, Mr Speaker, the Treasurer also froze the co-payments last night in his budget as well, for 1 year for millions of general patients and for up to 5 years for pensioners, for seniors health card holders and for holders of other concession cards. Absolutely terrific cost of living relief from the Treasurer for life-changing medicines. Mr Speaker, this is all obviously a world away from the approach from those opposite, because remember 10 years ago this week the Leader of the Opposition, when he was Health Minister, tried to jack up medicine prices by as much as $5 a script. He tried to make medicines dearer while we make medicines cheaper.
Minister's time is concluded. Give the call to the honourable member for Petrie.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Respected economic journalist Alan Kohler has said it's the big picture numbers that confirm this government to be an amazingly and unexpectedly big spending one. Why are Australians paying the price for the Prime Minister's weak economic leadership?
Order. The Minister for the Environment and Water will cease interjecting. The Minister for Infrastructure and the Minister for Home Affairs won't interject before a minister or the Minister for the Environment is warned. When I'm saying don't interject and explaining the reasons why, that's definitely not the time to interject. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Petrie for his question. The best response to that question is to respond with some facts. In the LNP's last budget in 2022, prior to the election, spending was provisioned for a 27.2% of spending as a percentage of GDP.
During COVID.
After.
Order. Prime Minister will pause. Order. Members, the Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting. Members on my right will cease interjecting. Everyone's going to cease interjecting. The member was heard in silence, and he deserved to be heard in silence. The Prime Minister is going to be given the same courtesy, and he has the call.
It's anger overload over there today, Mr Speaker. In that budget, they predicted, bear in mind, March 2022 budget, they projected in 2023-24 spending of 27.1% of GDP, and going forward in 2024-25, 26.6%. On all 3 years, our spending in the 2023-24 budget compares 24.5 compared with 27.2, 25.4 under Labor compared with their projections of 27.1, and 26.4 compared with 26.6 under the coalition. The biggest ever tax take by a federal government in a single year was 2005-2006 at 24.2% of GDP, and guess who the Minister for Revenue was? This bloke here. This bloke here. In their last budget, they had not a single saving. Not one. Nothing whatsoever. Nothing whatsoever. Our budgets have delivered $77 billion in total savings. $77 billion in total savings, including $27.9 billion in the budget that was handed down last night. And last night, in terms of revenue, we banked almost all the revenue upgrade in 2023-24. The former government averaged just 40% of revenue upgrades. Those opposite promised to deliver a surplus in their first year and every year, and delivered a big duck egg. Nothing. 0 out of 9. We've been in government for 2 years, and last night the Treasurer announced a projected surplus of $9.3 billion.
Order. The Treasurer will cease interjecting. The member for Newcastle has the call.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Education. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to help more young people from the outer suburbs and regions get the opportunity to go to university after a decade of coalition cuts to education?
Give the call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the sensational member for Newcastle for her question. I'm really glad that she asked me this question because for 50 years Newcastle Uni has been running fee-free uni-ready courses. And she's been a champion for all her time in the parliament and a defender of these courses. These are courses that have changed the lives of about 70,000 people in Newcastle and the Hunter. Today, 1 in 5 people who get a degree from Newcastle Uni start doing one of these fee-free courses. One of those is Jennifer Baker. Jennifer's from Maitland. She was a mum at the age of 19. She worked in hospitality for 10 years. One day she saw an ad for one of these courses in the local paper. Now she's got a science degree and an honours degree and a PhD. And she's a Fulbright scholar. She's now a computational medicinal chemist. That's what these courses do. They're a bridge between school and uni, giving you the skills to get to uni and succeed when you get there. Fee-free TAFE has been incredibly successful, and what we announced last night in the budget is that we are essentially going to uncap these fee-free uni-ready courses, like you see at Newcastle, right across the country. They're expected to increase the number of people doing these fee-free uni-ready courses by about 40% by the end of the decade, and double the number doing them by the end of the decade after that. Last night we also announced that we're going to uncap places at uni for kids from disadvantaged backgrounds who get the marks to go to uni. On top of that, we also announced a new needs-based funding system so that students from disadvantaged backgrounds and students who study in regional Australia get the extra support that they need to succeed when they get there. We know that students from disadvantaged backgrounds are less likely to finish their degree than other students, and this is all about fixing that, giving them extra academic support and extra wraparound support. Bob Hawke and Paul Keating saw an increase in the number of kids finishing high school from 40% to almost 80%. That was nation-changing stuff. This is the next step. In the budget, we've set a target that by 2050, 80% of our workforce hasn't just finished school, but they've gone to TAFE or university as well. And to hit that target, we've got to help more young people from the outer suburbs and the regions to get to uni and to succeed when they get there. And that's what these reforms are about. Fee-free uni-ready courses, uncapping places and needs-based funding. More spots and more support, opening the door of opportunity for more Australians. This is the sort of change, the sort of reform that helps to make sure that no one's held back and no one's left behind.
Call to the member for Wentworth.
My question is for the Treasurer. The budget papers project a structural deficit across the medium term into the 2030s. This is unsustainable. What is the Treasurer's plan to return to a structural budget balance, and when will this be?
Call to the Treasurer.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the member for Wentworth for her question, which reflects her long-standing interest in budget policy, in particular, in her case, tax reform. One of the most important reasons why the progress that we've made so far in the budget, in budget repair, is so important is because if you look at the 2 fastest growing areas of government spending, which is feeding that structural deficit to which the member rightly refers, the 2 fastest growing areas of spending were the interest on the debt that we inherited from those opposite, the first one, and the second one has been the NDIS. And we have taken considered, methodical action to address both of those areas, 2 of the big drivers. I pay tribute to the Minister Shorten, for the work that we do together on the NDIS, which recognises that we need to ensure that the NDIS continues to deliver for the people it was designed to help, and we need to do that in a way not by cutting back spending, by managing the growth of that spending, and so I pay tribute to him. And when it comes to the contribution of debt interest to the structural deficit, that's been considerable as well. And one of the reasons why it's so important we've been able to shave that $150 billion of debt this year is because it does save us something like $80 billion in debt interest over the course of the next 10 years. And you can see $80 billion does make a meaningful difference to the structural position of the budget in the medium term as well. So those are 2 things that we are doing. There's also an important role, and I think the member for Wentworth would acknowledge this, even if she may have a different combination of proposals when it comes to tax reform, but there is a role for tax reform in that too. Before the parliament, we've got changes to the PRRT. We've got changes to high balance superannuation. That's why it makes it so ironic those opposite are asking about billionaires when they are voting against some of these fairness measures in the tax system in the other place. But tax reform has a role to play as well, and in last night's budget there was more tax reform. And I acknowledge that the member for Wentworth would like us to go further and faster on tax reform, but that doesn't mean that it has been absent. We've been working through a really comprehensive tax reform agenda in a methodical and considered way. The changes last night, there were some compliance changes. There's obviously a tax cut for every taxpayer to return bracket creep in the best possible way. There's also small business tax incentives. There's tax incentives to make ourselves a renewable energy superpower. And there's also other important changes like the changes to capital gains taxes for foreign property owners. That's another change that's in the budget. So all of this together, Mr Speaker, the very responsible approach that the Prime Minister and the Cabinet and the government take to managing the budget is all about improving the structural position over time. We've done a whole heap of that. We've made some good progress, but we know that there is more to do.
The call to the honourable member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Speaker. My question's to the Minister for Small Business. How will small businesses benefit from the targeted support in last night's budget, and what could be standing in its way?
The call to the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homelessness and the Minister for Small Business.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and I do want to thank the wonderful member for Macquarie. The member for Macquarie has been a long-standing supporter of small business because, of course, she's been a small business owner herself, Mr Speaker, and she understands how important it is that we put downward pressure on inflation because of the input costs of small businesses, Mr Speaker. Indeed, we know that Australia's 2.5 million small businesses have been doing it tough, which is why we are providing targeted support in this year's budget. We know that they employ over 5 million Australians and, importantly, contribute $500 billion to our economy each and every year, Mr Speaker. So it's critical that they get the support that they need when we have those cost of living pressures. Indeed, it's laid out in our small business statement, Mr Speaker. That is part of the budget. It's $640 million in targeted support for small businesses. It starts, of course, with an extension, a 12-month extension to the $20,000 instant asset write-off that hopefully those across the other side there will be supporting, Mr Speaker, because, of course, you want to spend more now over there. Is that what I've just heard, Mr Speaker, from the Shadow Treasurer over there? He wants to spend more. He wants to spend more. OK. So we're providing $290 million in cash flow support through this instant asset write-off, and indeed they will be able to write off each asset up to $20,000, those businesses with an annual turnover of less than $10 million. So it is targeted, Mr Speaker, because we do need to put downward pressure on inflation. And of course, we also have, as the Minister for Energy has said, energy bill relief for small businesses. Around 1 million small businesses will be getting additional energy bill relief. And of course, last time we had energy bill relief for support for small businesses, those opposite voted against it, Mr Speaker. Another measure that small businesses can benefit from that this time I hope they're going to support when small businesses need this targeted support, Mr Speaker. Around 1 million businesses will be getting an additional $325 to help them with their energy costs. We also, very importantly, have extended for 2 years the financial counselling and mental health and wellbeing support for small businesses, because we do know that they're doing it tough, Mr Speaker, and that is $10 million for an extension for those services, including the Small Business Debt Hotline. And again, I would encourage small businesses who are in trouble, who need support, to contact them and to contact them early, and for those businesses that are having interactions with the Australian Tax Office to do that. But what this shows is we are supporting small businesses. There's also support for franchising, Mr Speaker, and importantly to make sure that small businesses are paid on time. I want to see those opposites support all of these measures for small business that the government is proposing.
The call to the honourable member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister.
A gym in my electorate of Lindsay has seen their energy costs go from $13,000 to $27,500. The $325 energy bill credit will barely cover a fraction of the increase. How are Western Sydney small businesses meant to survive under Labor's reckless energy policies, causing such high costs?
Order. Give a call. Order. Members on my left and my right will cease interjecting. Prime Minister will be heard in silence. Yes, the call.
I thank the member for Lindsay for her question. And of course, she, along with other members of the coalition, voted against our energy price relief plan, which assisted not just members in her electorate, but assisted small businesses in her electorate as well. They voted against it, like they didn't support any of the cost of living measures that were put in place. And now we had further announcements last night about cost of living relief, and they've walked away from that as well and have been opposing that as well. The member raises energy policy. Well, there's an opportunity tomorrow night for the Leader of the Opposition to actually tell us the energy policy. You know, to bring it out from wherever it's hidden. He gave a commitment that it would be announced, 2 weeks. He gave a notice of. When was that? That was back 9 weeks ago. And we've been waiting and waiting and waiting. And then he said it was going to be before the budget. We were going to know where the nuclear reactors were going to be. We were going to know, I assume, tomorrow night we'll hear who's paying for them, how they're going to be financed, whether they will be subsidised or whether they will be able to stand on their own 2 feet, as the Shadow Treasurer on Insiders on Sunday said they had to. The hypocrisy when it comes to those opposite is just extraordinary, because on Sunday the Shadow Treasurer did say, well, yeah, you shouldn't have subsidies, it should be able to stack up. But the Leader of the Opposition, when asked would you subsidise nuclear, said very clear, if it provides a baseload to renewables, then yes. And the Shadow Minister, when asked, isn't that part of the problem, that it's incredibly expensive, that you'd need government subsidies to get a nuclear industry up? Oh, look, there's no doubt that you need government involved. So they're against any government engagement to support private sector investment.
Prime Minister will pause the order. The Deputy Leader has the right to raise a point of order. She has the call.
Speaker, on relevance, the question was about the government's budget. It offered no request for compare or contrast. How can it be in order for the Prime Minister to continually just talk about the opposition, not his own budget?
The Prime Minister has had some order. The member for Hume will cease interjecting. I'm just going to ask the Prime Minister to return to the question and not simply. I'm trying to deal with the point of order. I'm so lucky for your help, but for this time, I have this one. I'm just going to ask the Prime Minister. Order. The Prime Minister. Order. Order. Members on my left. That just the Prime Minister needs to return back to the question.
Because there he is projecting again, Mr. Speaker, projecting
Order.
again, because he knows that tomorrow night is his third budget reply and he's yet to break his duck and announce a policy about energy. Yet to have any costings, yet to have any detail whatsoever.
Order. The Prime Minister needs to return to the question.
Was prepare for that, just like last night. Last night we announced an energy policy to deliver support to every household, and I await whether the member for Lindsay actually supports her constituents in supporting
the Prime Minister's time has concluded. Call to the honourable member for Paterson.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. After a decade of wage stagnation, why are better wages so important to the Albanese Labor government's economic agenda? And what approaches has our government rejected
Give a call to the Minister for Employment, Workplace Relations and Minister for the Arts.
Thanks very much, Speaker. And I thank the member for Patterson for the question and acknowledge the member's advocacy, including in particular of closing the labour hire loophole, which was being used in such an appalling way in her part of Australia. As the Treasurer has already reported, we're pleased to say today, as the numbers have come in, that real wages are still growing in this country, and that's real wages growing. That's real wages growing compared to when we came to office, when they were going backwards at 3.4%. 3.4%. And I love. We've talked about tests for the Leader of the Opposition. When I talk about real wages growing, the Shadow Treasurer is shaking his head, saying no, they're not. So when he leaves, here's a test: 4.1 and 3.6. Write both down and work out which is the bigger number. 4.1 is what's happening with wages. 3.6 is what's happening with inflation. Now, don't try to work it out now. Wait till you get back to the office. There'll be people to help you, maybe even an abacus available. But when wages are rising faster than inflation, that's called real wages growth. But I understand why they're sensitive about it. Wages growth, the WPI, when they were in office for their 10 years, averaged 2.2%. You look at what the Treasurer announced last night in the budget. Have a look at budget paper number 1. You might not have reached that one yet, but budget paper number 1, and you'll see the projection over the next 4 years, with real wages projected to grow in year 1, year 2, year 3 and year 4. But if real wages were still running at 2.2% as they averaged over them, real wages would be going backwards in year 1, year 2, year 3 and year 4. And we know this has been their view the whole way through, because it was the Shadow Treasurer himself, when we introduced our Secure Jobs Better Pay bill, when asked why he opposed it, he said, well, it pushes up wages. And then only as recently as Sunday on Insiders, and I can understand why the Shadow Treasurer didn't turn up to question time yesterday, straight after the Insiders interview. Not sure if it was because of budget rules or at the I don't know if you were locked up because of budget rules or at the request of your colleagues. It was one or the other. It was one or the other. Because in that interview, when asked about the budget,
on my left and right will
he said these words: "The way to get there is pretty straightforward. You do exactly what Matthias Cormann did from 2013." Which minister was the one who referred to low wages being a deliberate design feature of their economic management? It was Matthias Cormann and this opposition. And I'm looking forward to the announcements tomorrow night when we hear from the Leader of the Opposition the costed policies, when we hear from the Leader of the Opposition what the targeted package of repeals are. Because we know they want to cut wages. They want to cut wages. They want to pay for their nuclear reactors.
Order. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I ask further questions placed on the notice paper.
Order. I present the annual report of the AFP's handling of complaints against its officers, report on Commonwealth Ombudsman's activities under Port V of the Australian Federal Police Act 1979. Order. The member for Hume is on the MPI. I'm trying to table a report. So I'm just going to ask everyone to allow us so we can do these reports, and you will have your chance shortly. I present the annual report of the AFP's handling of complaints against its officers, report of Commonwealth Ombudsman activities under Part 5 of the Australian Federal Police Act 1979 for the period 1 July 2022 to 30 June 2023. Give the call to the Leader of the House with papers.
First of all, with papers, Speaker, these documents are tabled in accordance with the list circulated to the honourable members earlier today. Full details of the documents were recorded in the votes and proceedings.
I have to report that the order of the day relating to the Prime Minister's motion of condolence in connection with the tragic deaths of Zhejiang Cheng, Bakria Dashia, Ash Good, Torn Singleton, Feroz Tahir and Jade Young have been debated in the House, debated in the Federation Chamber and is returned to the House. I present a certified copy of the motion. The Leader of the House has the call.
The information of members. There are a number of members who wanted to continue to speak on that resolution, and it was put to the vote in the Federation Chamber earlier than had been intended. And I know that a number of people still want to speak. So with that in mind, I declare that the resumption of debate on the Prime Minister's motion of condolence in connection with the deaths of Yixuan Cheng, Picrea Chair, Ashgood, Dawn Singleton, Faraz Tahir and Jade Young is referred to the Federation Chamber. There'll be another opportunity this afternoon to speak